Alright, so this is going to be part 2 to the series of videos covering the villain AMON. If you guys don't remember what happened in the first video, I'll give you a little refresher unless you want to go back and watch it, because it's been a while since I uploaded that one. Basically, we just covered AMON's journey to becoming a Lich. He had a mom, he had a dad, like most people. They raised enough money to send him to Forge Hole, where he could study magic. He studied under a dwarven mentor. He watched that mentor die of old age. He then began journeying into various ruins and caverns, basically just trying to collect as much research as he could. He sold the items that he didn't personally value, made a decent amount of money from it. He was essentially an adventurer for a small amount of time. Didn't really help anybody, but he was definitely collecting a lot of interesting things and fighting a lot of monsters and other powerful things. He met 2 paladins, got them in his employ, essentially convinced them to turn away from their gods and become darker and corrupter beings. He got enough money to build himself his own little castle. His mother moved in with him. He had to watch his mother die. He slowly began to slip, eventually enslaved a local village just outside of his castle, and was subsequently killed as a result by the armies of Forge Hall, just to the north. He then came back, however, because he had just finished completing all the necessary steps to becoming a Lich. He brought his paladin followers back to life as Death Knights, and then he headed out into the world. Amon's death, his first death rather, occurred in the year 445. So all of those events in the first video actually happened prior to the founding of the Parazorian Empire. Excuse me, there was no empire at that point yet. It was just small towns that were subservient to larger, more powerful regions at that point, and then a lot of open space. The newly formed Lich and his Death Knights almost immediately began exploring the wilds of the Parazorian continent. The first location they began exploring was the frozen highlands to the north. For almost 100 years, Amon and his Death Knights delved into these ancient ruins. However, he never fully discovered the truth of the old world, of the old Parazorian continent that was once named Paradius. He never learned about its destruction. He had a lot of pieces of the puzzle through his collecting of old items, but he never fully figured it out. After his 100 years, his century that he spent just traveling through this frozen wasteland, Amon would then begin exploring in the Stormlands to the east. He would be pleased to discover that much of the land was wild and full of dark creatures and monsters that were weaker than him. The bleak mountainous regions offered much land free for the taking, and many monsters looking to serve powerful creatures. Eventually, he gathered a bunch of these creatures in his service and ordered the construction of his fortress. This was a tall, black metal structure almost 3 times the size of his former castle. Amon's hoard had become so large that he needed somewhere to put it all, as well as a safe place to study. He had thousands of tomes and spell scrolls, as well as many magical items and more gold than he could ever spend. Amon spent the next 100 years just studying his hoard, just looking over everything that he had collected. One day, while Rummaging through his things, he discovered a map which supposedly had pointed to the location of a portal to the Feywild. The portal, however, was located inside of the borders of the now newly formed Parazorian Empire. The Empire had been expanding the whole time that he had been just kind of hanging out and running around discovering things. So he decided to go alone, believing that he could slip in and out relatively unnoticed by himself. The Empire had actually already passed through its first age, the first age of the Parazorian Empire, and the Civil War had happened, and now the Empire was split into two, the Old Empire and the Southern Empire. The portal location was actually in the Old Empire, or the Northern Empire. So he arrived at this pond in this small clearing, and he waited and waited and waited, looking for any signs that there was a portal present. When the full moon came out, he entered into the waters, noticing a glowing coming from the waters. He was immediately teleported into the Feywild, and there was an archfey waiting by the water on the portal, or waiting by the waters of the pond on the opposite side in the Feywild. This archfey was named Aurum. Aurum would initially show anger seeing this necromantic creature entering into his home, but then would ask Amon if he knew how to resurrect someone who had long been dead. Aurum explained that he loved an elven woman who took her own life, and he had been searching for a way to bring her soul back, seeing as the traditional means of resurrection weren't working. Amon would lie to Aurum, the archfey, and say that he did not know of such spells. After speaking for a while to this archfey, he would eventually leave the Feywild and return to his studies. But the archfey would come visit Amon from time to time, and the two would exchange information. Almost 30 years after their initial encounter, Aurum visited the Lich in his new fortress and explained the existence of the Jewels of Arrow. He then produced one from his hand and informed Amon of Parazor's past, saying that the Jewels of Arrow were extremely powerful. Amon would begin researching these jewels and discovering powerful, limit-breaking spells which could be cast using them. One of the spells he discovered was the Avatar spell, the ability to essentially become a god. However, the spell would require at least 4 jewels to cast, and between the two of them they only had 1. Amon shared this information with Aurum, the archfey, and then Aurum would offer Amon a partnership. He revealed that he had kept the body of the elven woman that he had loved. He kept it preserved with magic throughout the years. He offered this body to Amon as a vessel, as a symbol of their new partnership. Amon would agree and transfer his consciousness over to this new, fresh vessel. The two would then set out, attempting to discover as many jewels of arrows as they could, collecting them. Their agreement was that once the jewels were collected, once 8 full jewels were collected, each would attempt the ritual together, ascending themselves to the status of minor deities, and then they would combine their essence. They would then combine their essence at that point, becoming one larger singular entity. The more Amon thought about this idea, the more it appealed to him. The idea of being worshipped, of becoming a god, of becoming powerful. He would then order the founding of the cult of the Silver Skull. This cult was made up of powerful spell-casting worshippers, and they would essentially do whatever he wanted, which mostly what he wanted was to find more of these jewels. Within the Stormlands, there existed 3 major seats of power: the Storm Giants, the Storm Coalition, and Amon. Amon wanted to control all of the Stormlands, so he decided that between the 2 other seats of power, the Storm Giants and the Storm Coalition, the Coalition would likely be the easiest to take over. There will be a separate video on the Storm Coalition. They were a group of blue dragons that actually ignored their nature of wanting to be alone and by themselves and instead worked together. Their leader at this time was Drak, the blue founder dragon and son of Tiamat. Amon waited until a gathering of the Storm Coalition and challenged Drak to a single combat. Drak, seeing that he was being challenged in front of everyone, boasted a bit and said that Amon was more than welcome to allow his 2 Death Knights to fight alongside him. This was a big mistake, as Amon, along with the help of his 2 Death Knights, were able to, through a great battle, defeat him and destroy Drak. The power of the Storm Coalition then passed to Drakul, the son of Drak, and Drakul agreed to follow Amon. However, many members of the Storm Coalition refused to follow the Lich, and almost half of the group's 25 members left, traveling to separate locations to live as dragons should, believing that the Coalition died with Drak. With Amon now having power over the dragons, he essentially controlled every portion of the Stormlands, except for the northwestern kingdom of the Storm Giants. His dragons had heard of a few possible locations for the Jewels of Arrow, and Amon set his Silver Skull members out to discover the validity of these rumors. Each location, however, had turned out to be false. And for 60 years, Amon and Aram searched for more jewels, but with no success. This was until Amon was approached by a mind flare by the name of Falkren. So that's going to be the end of part 2. I'll be working on the other parts to this series, as well as a few other videos to come. I'll have to check my notes. I'm not 100% sure which video is going to be uploaded next. So just let me know what you guys think of this format. It's definitely a lot easier for me to do it this way. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll try to upload more if I can. This new format will definitely allow me to upload more frequently. Thank you.